Hi, good morning. Today I would like to talk about a movement that was started by Mahatma Gandhi that would ultimately pave the way for independence of India. And it was a movement that was started in 1930, and it has got to do with disobeying certain laws of the British rule in India at that time. And ultimately, as the movement progressed, a lot of people would be arrested, imprisoned, and there would be assaults from the police. And the suffering caused to the people, ultimately Gandhi thought, would enable a change of minds of the British in India. The change of minds was regarding to a certain issue that Gandhi had arisen to the Viceroy of India at that time, Lord Irwin. And today, on the occasion of Gandhi Jayanti, I would like to talk about what that issue is and how the Viceroy of India at that time did not respond to the request of Gandhi regarding the issues, and how Gandhi had started a disobedience movement which had encouraged the entire nation to carry the same movement, disobeying a certain laws of the British Empire in India, and how it ultimately paved the way for India uh, towards uh, towards getting independence from the British rule. So let me right away start with what are the problems that Gandhi had highlighted to the Viceroy of India at that time in 1930, Lord Irwin. Gandhi on March 2nd, 1930 had written a letter to the Viceroy Lord Irwin, and in that letter he had spotted a lot of problems of the British rule, how they were oppressing the masses, how they were oppressing the people of India in general. And it has got to do with the high land taxes extracted from the poor of India. There were millions of poor in India at that time. So and 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 he highlighted how the British administration to carry out its administration to carry out its to maintain its military, and also uh, to carry forward its commercial interests in India, was extracting large sums of revenue from the poor of India. As I told you, it has got to do with the land revenue collected by the British. It has got to do with many taxes that the British imposed on certain goods that the poor had bought from the British, for example, salt. In that letter, he had specifically talked about salt, how the British was selling salt, and how the British has restricted the sale and the purchase of salt to only certain people by having a system of licenses. British, in effect, had the monopoly over the production and the manufacture of salt at that time. If private entities had wanted to sell and manufacture salt, they had to take permission from British, and that permission involved a license, and the license also carried a condition that the private manufacturers, had to pay huge sums of tax to the British Empire. And over and above that, there were the price of salt, the price at which it had to be sold in the market, was also decided by the British based on that license that it would provide to private entities if at all they wanted to sell. So by the time the salt reached the market, the prices of salt were inflated. So in effect, the people who wanted to produce salt had to pay a lot of taxes. They were losing out. So there were not many people who sought licenses from the British to produce and sell salt. And over and above that, it was mostly the British government which had the monopoly over selling the salt. It had its own depots, it had its own salt works. So what it had done is, it had the freedom to set whatever price it wanted, so as to use it as a revenue for its administration, commercial purposes, as well as military in India. So this way, both ways, even if license were given to certain private entities, the price of salt in the market was highly inflated to the extent that it would not be affordable to many of the millions of poor of India. And even if the British had sold it, which the British had done majority of the times, the price was inflated because British had the monopoly to sell the salt. It could decide on the price, and the reason that um, it inflated the prices when the British itself sold the salt. The reasons given by British government was that it was a source of revenue. Salt was an essential commodity, and it was an easy source of revenue for British to carry out its administration, to carry out its commercial interests in India, and also maintain a military. You can really see that it was an exploitative practice to ensure that the revenues had come to the British and it came from the poor, because salt was a commodity which was essential and everyone would buy it most of the times, but it was made unaffordable to the poor. So Gandhi had arisen this issue about the salt taxes and the need to do away with such taxes or reduce such kind of taxes so that the poor would benefit. His line of argument was that the poor were the hardworking people in the society, and it was them who required the intake of salt because it was an essential part of the nutrition. It was as essential as, according to Gandhi, it was as essential as consumption of air and water. So Gandhi had pointed out these points to Lord Irwin in his letter. He had also further gone on to say that the money, the maximum revenue that was extracted from the poor was going to the British administration in the form of salaries, and he took the example of Lord Irwin. He took this example of salary of Lord Irwin. He gave him the example saying that per month Lord Irwin would receive 21,000 rupees, which was a large amount at that time, which meant that per day Lord Irwin was earning rupees 700. And Gandhi had compared this amount to the average income of India, which was only 1/8 of a rupee, even less than that per day. It was called 2 annas at that time. So less than 2 annas was the average income of Britain, of India at that time. So comparing the income of the viceroy with the average income, Gandhi had said that the viceroy's income was more than 5,000 times the average income of India. And he also further went on to compare, saying that the Prime Minister of Britain at that time would only have a salary which was 90 times the average income of the British nation. So Viceroy was earning large sums of money, which Gandhi had said that he would not have any use to, and Gandhi thought that it was probably given to even charity. And the same situation was true of what was true of the salary of the Viceroy was also true for the entire administration of the British in India. And this was what Gandhi was arguing. And Gandhi wanted that the large sums of money that that were going into the salary of the administration was extracted from the poor people, extracted from people who had a very less money with them. So Gandhi had urged the Viceroy in his letter to think about a change in the political system, administrative system of the British, so that the poor were benefited. He went on, and Gandhi had also said that if the points that he had raised did not appeal to the Viceroy, then Gandhi would begin a movement where he would defy a certain salt laws of the British, which were enacted in 1882, and he would signal the entire nation, which was behind him, to also do the same. And once that happens, the entire nation would have to take the assault to the police for having disobeyed the law. And they would have to be arrested and they would have to be put in prison. The sufferings of the people of the nation, okay, would be glaringly visible, and this Gandhi thought would hopefully bring a change in the hearts of the British towards the issue of the revenue collected from the poor. So, in Gandhi's words, he told that it would possibly change even the stoniest of hearts. In this way, he had um, he was Gandhi was also open to meeting Irwin to discuss the issue about the conditions of the poor and the salt tax that they were paying, and to talk about the first future course of action. So, and Gandhi had specifically told the viceroy in the letter that if the demands or the requests of Gandhi, let me tell you one thing, when Gandhi had requested Irwin that to look into the administrative revenues received by the government, Gandhi had done so with a bent knee. He had asked the viceroy to look into the issue with a bent knee. This was what he had written in the letter. And if such request did not appeal, Gandhi said that on the 11th day of the month of March, Gandhi had written the letter on March 2nd, 1930, and Gandhi had told in the letter that on the 11th day of the month March, he would trigger a disobedience movement against the civil laws in the country. As I told you, he was also open to talking to Irwin even before the time he had set for starting the movement. And finally, he had written all this, and he had sent the letter to a British person who was also sympathizing with the cause of Indians at that time, and his name was Reginald Reynolds. Reginald Reynolds had taken the letter to the house of the viceroy. The viceroy had immediately written from a place called Meerut in UP to receive the letter, and he would receive the letter, and he would decide that he would not reply to the letter himself but delegate it to his secretary. And his secretary had replied to Gandhi saying that the viceroy had thought that Gandhi was contemplating something that would disturb the peace of the nation. It would be a law and order issue, and therefore it would be problematic. And so Gandhi had received the letter from the secretary, the reply, and Gandhi understood from this letter that the viceroy was not in any mood to entertain any of the requests of Gandhi, entertain the request of Gandhi. So, in other words, Gandhi thought that viceroy was not ready to pay heed to the request of Gandhi, and with that with that in mind, Gandhi had commented that Gandhi had requested for bread with a bent knee, but all he received was stone. So these were the comments of Gandhi after having read the reply of the secretary. Further, Lord Irwin, the viceroy, was also not willing to meet Gandhi, that Gandhi was open to discuss about the issue, and Gandhi was also not arrested for the same. And this prompted Gandhi to say that the British were perplexed, the British were confused, because if they would have arrested Gandhi, they would be in troubled waters. If they have not arrested Gandhi, they would still be in troubled waters once Gandhi would start the movement on 12th March 1930. Both ways, the British were perplexed, and moreover, Lord Irwin was not willing to talk to Gandhi as well. Saying this on March there is a sound. Okay. Saying this on March 12th, on 1930 of March 12th, Gandhi would start off from a region in Gujarat, from his ashram in Ahmedabad called Sabarmati Ashram, with his followers of 78 members from that ashram, to go to a place which was close to Surat, which was at a seashore called Dandi. And the intention was to ensure that Gandhi, along with his 78 followers, would go there and would carry some salt which would be left by the waters of the seashore, and then signal the nation to start disobeying the salt laws. Let me give you a brief description of the salt laws once again. There was only the government had the monopoly to be able to produce salt, to be able to store salt, to be able to distribute salt. If anyone else wanted to make salt, if a private entity wanted to make salt, they had to first get permission from the government in the form of a license, and that included a huge tax. And and in this case, Gandhi was asking his followers to not have any license, to not get any permission from the government, and make that salt and carry that salt and signal the nation to make that salt themselves without having to pay the taxes for the salt, without having to get the license from the government, and without having to pay heed to the price regulations of the British government. So this was where the Gandhi was signaling the nation to disobey the salt law. And salt law also provided that those who disobeyed the law, they would be punished with imprisonment. They would be, the salt that they made would be confiscated, and they would also have to pay a fine. So that was the gist of the law, the salt laws. And so Gandhi had started from Sabarmati Ashram on 12th March 1930 with his followers, and there were 78 of them, and they had to travel a distance of 371, around 321.68 kilometers, and they had done so in 24 days. So it was long, the journey was long, and sorry about the sound of the cooker. I will be a little louder. And once the march had begun, he along with his followers would go through winding dusty paths and pass through many villages, and there they would find that many of the homes of the villages were decorated with the Indian colors, and there were some people by the side of the road who would kneel down to give respect to the followers and welcome them to Gandhi himself as the followers and Gandhi passed by them. Gandhi and his followers had also stopped at certain locations to give advice and urge people not to consume drink or have drugs. And he would also tell the people to wear khadi and stay clean. And most importantly, he would tell the people that when the time came when he would signal the nation, to signal the people to disobey the salt law, and they should do it. He urged them to do it. And as I told you, they were walking long distances, and in a day they would walk around 20 kilometers, taking break twice. And Gandhi, even though he had a horse during the entire length, span of his march, he would not use that horse, and he would walk by foot. And he was 61 years at that time. His age was 61. And there were some people in the group who would develop sore feet and would be tired and opt for entering into a bullock cart and travel. And Gandhi, seeing all this, would say that the present generation was delicate, weak, and much pampered. Nevertheless, Gandhi was able to make the entire journey through foot. And let me come back to this march again. They were passing through various villages, and there were these village headmen. As a form of respect to Gandhi, they would resign from the government posts that they were given as a headman. There were around 300 village headmen who had done that, and there were also people who would accompany the followers from one village to the next temporarily. And finally, as the march ended on 5th March 1930 at the shores of a place near Surat in Gujarat called Dandi, the number of followers of Gandhi had swollen from 78 to thousands of them. So ultimately, they would reach the shores of Dundee on 5th March 1930. On 6th March 1930, Gandhi would take a dip in the sea and return back and collect some salt that was left out by the waters of the shore. And that gave the signal to the entire nation that they had to start disobeying the salt laws. The salt that the Gandhi had picked up was also auctioned off to a person called Dr. Kaniga for 1600 rupees. This was also a kind of violation of the salt law, because only the British government had the monopoly to sell salt, and if they had to allow others to do it, they had to get permission. In this case, it was auctioned off, and not only that, it was also sold at a price not regulated by the government but through an auction. So the movement had begun in the entire nation, in different parts of India. Ultimately, what happened was people were gathering at the shoreline of India, the entire shoreline of India, and salt was being prepared there. And salt was also being prepared in the inlands by putting at the roofs of the houses or buildings using salt pans. So what this invited was, it invited the attention of the police in different parts of India. Police would arrest the people who were making that salt illegally, and they would put them in jails. They would also arrest the crowd that was surrounding around the locations where the salt was being prepared illegally. Let me give you some examples. So in Bombay, in the Congress headquarters, salt was being prepared, and there were around 60,000 people who gathered to watch it, and thousands of these people were imprisoned or jailed. In Allahabad, the President of Congress, Jawaharlal Nehru, was also arrested for violating the Salt Acts, and he was imprisoned. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail. Let me go to Patna and tell you what happened there. Thousands of people were going towards a region where salt was being prepared, and the police had blockaded the highway through which the people were going. The people would not budge because of this. The people would just stay at that spot, and for 40 hours they would stay. They would even sleep on the road and also in the fields, close to the fields, on the fields. And the police had instructed the crowd to stop marching forward, but the crowd would disobey the orders, and the police had threatened the crowd that they would run over the crowd using the cavalry, the horses on which they were on, the police. But when they knew that the police would do such a thing, the people had started lying flat on the floor, on the road. And when that happened, when the cavalry was charging towards the people, the horses would shy away from stamping or trampling on the people. So the ploy of the police did not work there, and the police went for the plan B. The plan B was to drag the people towards the trucks and put them so that they can be put in jails. But even that also quite did not work, because the demonstrators who would be put in the trucks would be replaced by some other demonstrators in their place. So the protest went on strongly, and police have also arrested them. Okay, people did not resist the arrest. People willfully went to the jails. Police also resorted to violence in many places. One place in which they had resorted to violence was in a place close to Dandi called Darsana. It was got to do with a certain number of volunteers or the followers of Gandhi who had wanted to raid the government salt works at Darsana, and they wanted to show that the salt belongs to the people, and it could not be a monopoly of the government, because salt was an essential item, and the poor people, it was the right of the poor people to get it at affordable prices. All the more so because they were hard workers, and they were living in tropical regions, and salt was an essential commodity for them. So I'll talk about the details of this violence a little later shortly. But before that, let me talk about other incidents of violence. In Peshawar, in the northwestern part of India, there was an armed vehicle that would crash into a group of large number of crowds who were carrying out the movement in a non-violent fashion. They would crash into the crowds, and the vehicle would also, from the vehicle there would be gunshots that would be directed towards the people, and there were around 70 people who died with that incident, and many hundreds of them, or more than 100 of them, were injured in the entire event there, in the violence. So this was about what the police had done once the people had tried to violate the salt laws, and once people non-violently carrying out the demonstrations and protests. Not only that, when it comes to imprisoning, when it comes to making salt and selling salt in Ahmedabad, in people after 1 week after the event had occurred, the event of picking up salt at Dandi by Gandhi had occurred. In Ahmedabad, people would buy salt from Congress, and some people would pay money for it, and some people would take it for free. Again, this was a violation of the government act because government set the prices for the salt, and here people are buying at whatever prices they want. Some people are taking it for free as well. So protest, non-violent disobedience of laws were happening uh, um, quite successfully. And on the top of that, at different places, a lot of leaders, Indian leaders of nationalist movement, have also resigned from their legislative assembly. Let me take the example of Mr. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, who was based from Uttar Pradesh, and in Delhi, he uh, he had actually resigned from his legislative assembly, and he had also and there was also another person in Bengal who was the mayor of Bengal called James Sengupta, who would sorry there was a person who was a speaker of a legislative assembly called Vittalbhai Patel, who was the brother of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and a prominent politician and a nationalist leader, who would also resign from his post of speaker. So this was again another instance where people had shown their opposition to the British rule in a non-violent way. There were also other ways in which the people had shown their opposition in non-violent way. For example, uh, there would be some people would be urged to ensure that they would be urged not to wear foreign clothes, and such demands also came from the Madan Mohan Malviya, based from Uttar Pradesh, a politician, an educationist, an education reformer, social reformer, and also most importantly a leader of the nationalist movement. He would urge the people not to boycott the foreign clothes. Another person who would tell that not to wear the foreign clothes was a mayor in Bengal called J.M. Sengupta. He would urge the people not to wear foreign clothes. People were also urged to not to buy liquors from the government tax liquor shops. This was another mode you know, of showing opposition to the government in a non-violent way. People also showed other forms of opposition. For example, in parts of West Bengal and in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, there were peasants who would refuse to pay rent and land taxes. So these were the many ways in which people throughout the nation have involved themselves or participated themselves in showing opposition to a repressive British rule. And one way they had done that, and majority of them, was to disobey the salt law. And when the police came to arrest them and repress them, they had not shown any signs of resistance. They had willfully got arrested and would be put in jail. And I've also talked about other ways in which people showed opposition to the government. Ultimately, this movement would go on for many months, and there would be around 100,000 political prisoners who would be imprisoned in jails. Jails would be swollen up. And ultimately, Gandhi himself would also be arrested after a few months on May 5th, 1930. I told you that even before his arrest, Gandhi had wanted to raid a salt works, a government salt works in a town in Gujarat called Darsana. It was called Darsana Salt Works. And I told you the symbolism behind that as well just a little few minutes ago. And before he could carry out the raid along with his companions, Gandhi himself was arrested. Nevertheless, his companions had followed up on their plan, and they were headed by a poet called Sarojini Naidu. I will talk about that, what happened there at the salt works, and the kind of violence that the police had resorted to there. But even before that, let me come to the arrest of Gandhi. Gandhi was also arrested. It took some few months. It happened on 5 May 1930. On 4 May 1930, Gandhi was at a place which was near Dandi. It was at a village near Dandi called Karadi. Gandhi on 4th May was going to sleep. He was going to sleep on a cot in a shed, which was over which was a mango tree. So it was a compound. There was a compound, and Gandhi had found a place to sleep there, and he slept. And along with him, some of his followers had also slept with him. Other followers would sleep somewhere else nearby within the compound somewhere. And on 5th May 1930, at the midnight at 12:45 a.m., there would be some heavy footsteps of the police that would be heard, and it was some Indian policemen who would enter into the compound, and also a British magistrate, and along with some constables, the British magistrate would enter into the shed of Gandhi, and he would shine a light on his face, and Gandhi would wake up and ask him if the magistrate wanted Gandhi. The magistrate would say yes, and Gandhi had requested some time to carry out his ablutions. The magistrate would permit him to do so, and meanwhile Gandhi would ask him on what charge was he going to be arrested, and the magistrate told him that it was based on an order from the government, and the Gandhi wanted to know the details of the order, and the magistrate had talked to him about the order, saying that Gandhi had to be imprisoned in a jail in Pune, Maharashtra called Yerwada jail, and he had to be imprisoned because his activities were alarming for the government, and he would be imprisoned at the pleasure of the government. There was no time, there was no trial, there was no sentence that was pronounced. He would be just imprisoned. So having heard this, Gandhi had finished his ablutions, and he had entered into a vehicle outside the compound which was waiting outside, and ultimately he was arrested on May and he was imprisoned in the Yerwada jail in Pune, Maharashtra. So now let me come to the violent actions of the police of the British, which had occurred in the place close to Dandi called Dharasana, at the Dharasana salt works. I told you that the companions of Gandhi had continued their plan to raid the salt works. Let me elaborate on this incident, and let me tell you how the violence was carried out here, because there are great details about this incident. So there were 2,500 companions of Gandhi who had assembled, and they were led by the poet Sarojini Naidu. And Sarojini Naidu had warned the companions, saying that they were going to receive some heavy blows from the police. They should not resist those blows, and they should also ensure that they should not raise their arms to ward away those blows from the police. In effect, what she was telling is there was going to be a heavy police assault, and they were not supposed to show any resistance to the assault. They were supposed to just march towards the salt works and just carry out their goal of raiding the salt works, and I told you the reason behind that a few minutes ago. So accordingly, the companions the volunteers, the followers of Gandhi had reached the location of the salt works. They were around 90 meters in front of the barriers that separated them and the salt works. Near the barrier there was a ditch around the salt works, and there were these policemen. There were 400 policemen, Indian policemen, commanded by 6 British officers. So there would be a column that would be separated from the main 2,500 of the followers. Just a second. Sorry. And this column, which was headed by a person called Manilal Gandhi, would march forward towards the police, and they would go over the ditch, and once they reached near the police, they would be instructed by the police to retreat back. They would disobey the orders, and they would keep marching forward. The police vigorously, under command would be charging towards the protesters, and they would give them blow after blow on their heads and shoulders. The protesters would not show any signs of resistance. They would take the blow. They would not show any fear, and ultimately, as they moved forward, some of the protesters would be struck down. They would either be unconscious, or they would have a fractured skull, or their shoulders would be damaged. In effect, they were in pain, but they would not show any fear. They would keep marching forward until they would be struck down by the police. And after the first column was struck down, there was the next column that would meet the same fate of the first column, and there were columns after columns. There would be a point that would be reached when a certain column would sit down as after they marched. The police would then be frustrated, and they would be giving them the blows as well, but they would also drag them by their feet and arms and put them in the ditches. There was an instance of a man who was also put in the ditch and given a heavy blow on his head. Ultimately, what happened was that there would be hour after hour, there would be stretchers that would be carrying away people to a safe spot. There was a makeshift hospital, a temporary hospital that was set up. A journalist from USA would see all these proceedings, called Webb Miller, and he would count the number of people who would be injured in that hospital. There were 320 of them, and 2 people had also died, and many of them would also be traumatized with the pain in their bodies and the heads because of the blows that they had been struck by the police. He was impressed with the lack of fear in the volunteers, the lack of resistance in them. He told that there was no song to cheer them to move forward. They did not have an option to go away from to escape the fate of the blows and the assaults from the police, yet without resistance they would move forward. So this was the kind of violence and repression that was shown by the British rule on the non-violent protesters, and all this had also gained international recognition, international attention from people, and it has exposed the repression of the British rule in India. Initially, the impression about the British in Asia was that British were a principled people and they had a sense of fairness and justice. But all this was um, gone now. The impression had fallen, and what was exposed finally was the British sense of white superiority, and also their intentions of India being more of commercial interest than of anything else about the people of India, And according to Rabindranath Tagore, the blows that the people had faced, the heavy, hard blows on their bodies, was, and without resisting those blows, without fear, had made the British powerless. And he would say this because he had told that Gandhi had given the people the courage to rise up to British and look down on British towards their sense of lack of justice, which the people till then or before that would look up to they would look up to the British until then. Now the people had the strength to look down to the British on a certain pretext, the pretext being their lack of justice, their lack of sensitivity to the cause of people, their lack of awareness of the exploitation of the poor people in India. So Gandhi had given them the courage to carry out a non-violent, painful protest. And Tagore had told, Rabindranath Tagore, the famous poet, had told that with this kind of courage, it was only a matter of time before the British would leave India and leave it independent. So this was one moment which was successful, even though the British had not left India, even though India was a colony of British, and even though there were no changes at the ground level regarding the British administration, the extraction of huge revenues which majorly came from the poor. What it had done is it has given courage to common people in India to fight and look against British, look down on British, um, and ultimately this had uh, the effect of putting the British out of the country in the future. It was only a matter of time. So, so this was about the Salt March, the famous Salt March of Gandhi, and the civil disobedience that was created in the entire nation. Let me tell you one more thing. There was an incident which occurred a few years ago, before 1913, 1920, where there was a movement which was again begun by Gandhi called the non-cooperation movement. At that time, the movement was abruptly stopped because there was violence in in a police station by the protesters. Uh, called Chori. There was a violence in the police station in UP called Choli Chora, and the protests were abruptly brought to a halt on the instruction of Gandhi. This time, there was very little violence. Mostly, it was peaceful. There were sporadic incidents of violence in Chittagong, a place in Bengal at that time, where some revolutionaries had raided the arsenal or the arms of the British, and many of them were also killed. But other than that, mostly the place, this moment was did not have violence. It was a peaceful moment, and people had learned their lessons from their past experiences. They feared that Gandhi would also stop this movement, which was carried out with great fervor, and restrain from carrying out any violence in this movement, and therefore it was quite successful compared to the last one in 1930, in 1920. So I hope you found this video about Gandhi's Salt March, and his civil disobedience, and his intentions as to how he could change even the stoniest of hearts. Thank you.